Hey everybody, Barrett with Salty Dog Performance, and I've got another ski here in the garage to work on today. So this is a return customer who I had done a carbon seal, jet pump rebuild, wear ring, all that stuff for him back in like March of this year. And he calls me on Saturday. He's riding with his girlfriend on the back, and he says that the ski felt heavy in the rear, and it was shut off on him, and it was taking on water. The water was up to the battery. I was like, okay, well please don't start it again. If it's gone up to the battery, it's definitely water has gone into your supercharger because he had a shorty rear air intake on there. And he immediately started to say, oh, it's the carbon seal. And I said, look man, carbon seal is kind of like cancer. You don't just get cancer in one day and then die from it, okay? Cancer's been there for a long period of time, okay? So what ended up happening, and I asked him this, I was like, please check all the hoses when you get home. It sounds to me like a hose popped off somewhere. He had just put in a new OEM intercooler, so it's kind of suspicious of that. Takes it home, says that no hoses are disconnected anywhere. So I tell him to pull the spark plugs out of it and put it in dry mode and fire it, and sure enough, water's coming out of the cylinders. So water did get ingested through the supercharger, through the intercooler, and the intake manifold. So with that, supercharger's got to come off, intercooler's got to come off, and the, sorry about that, I got a fly buzzing around my eye, and the intake manifold's got to get taken off as well to drain everything out. So I did ask him last night though, did you check the two hoses that are on the exhaust manifold? And he's like, yeah, all the hoses are tight. So when he comes to the house, I go and I check it out, and what do I find? A hose disconnected. One of the exhaust manifold hoses, the smaller one on the rear. And the reason that I kind of thought that that was what it was from the beginning is because he never got an overtemp light. He's not had any kind of issues showing that it would be a carbon seal before. He's not having water in the hull or anything. So for it to just fail all of a sudden while you're cruising at 40 miles an hour didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I show him the hose, and he's like, oh man, I feel like an idiot on that. So there's no point in feeling like an idiot like that. I mean, these things can come off. So it's really important to go through and check the hoses and make sure they're tight and everything. So needless to say, it's got a lot of work that needs to be done to it. Luckily the engine did shut down, and it wasn't any kind of the water ingested into it and it bent a rod or anything like that. I am going to check compression and everything like that just to make sure, but I think what happened is like the map sensor got water, it started to change the air volumes and stuff in there, and it just shut down. It doesn't sound like the engine got damaged at all, so we're good there. There's also it doesn't seem that there is any milky oil, so it doesn't look like we're going to have to do a boil out procedure, but we're going to go ahead and take all that stuff off. I'm going to get some fogging oil down into the cylinders, get all the water out that I can out of them, and we'll just go from there. So let's get into it. So before I start to take everything apart, I'm not going to show you how to do the supercharger. We've already done that before. I'll show you the intercooler and the intake manifold though. But you can see the hose right here. It popped off. This is the small one that goes on the back of the exhaust manifold right here. So yep, that is the one that popped off. Carbon seal is good. No issues there. It was definitely that hose that popped off, and it's pretty apparent. So that hose popping off is one of the reasons that it did not get an exhaust overtemp, because the main line that goes to the front of the exhaust manifold was not disconnected, so it was getting plenty of water coming through the exhaust to keep it from overheating. So yep, that's the hose that came off. That's our culprit. That is now going to take quite a few hours to get this thing back up and running. So we're going to take off of our intercooler here, and the way that I do it is pretty simple. I'm just going to take off the 8mm right there, the 8mm hose clamp to the throttle body, loosen the two straps, take off the 1/4 inch hose clamp off of the intercooler exit and the intercooler inlet, and then the 1/4 inch for the vent tube on the top, and then I'm just going to pull the intercooler with the hoses out in one piece. Okay, so all the hoses are loose, our straps are loose. We're going to move those out of the way. I'm just going to grab the two hoses here and pull the whole assembly out. Okay, so let's see how much water is inside of this thing. I'm going to plug the two inlet and outlet in the drain holes with my fingers and just see how much comes out of the actual, oh yeah. This engine has definitely ingested a lot of salt water. So we got to clean out the intercooler. So yeah, there we go, guys. The importance of checking on these hose clamps and stuff, and yeah, it's part of maintenance. Okay, over here at the intake manifold, we're going to need to take off. So we're going to disconnect our throttle body connector there, our map sensor connector here, and we're going to have to cut all these zip ties off of the fuel rail. And our coil packs are already disconnected. We're going to disconnect the injectors as well, and we're going to have to take our fuel line off. Now when we pop the fuel line off, it is going to be under some pressure. We're going to take a rag and just put here and try to capture any of that gas, and then make sure to keep this fuel line up and elevated. Once we get all that out of the way, you'll see we've got 7 E8 bolts that we're going to, or screws that we're going to loosen up, and then pull everything out, and the injector fuel rail will stay on with the injectors. So we're not going to take the injectors out. We're going to leave those on the fuel rail. It makes it way easier. Once you got all the bolts removed, we're just going to grab the fuel rail, and you'll notice that the oil dipstick tube is going to try to stick to it. So you're just going to pull that, make sure it separates away. I'm going to stuff the rag inside of a fuel rail here, and we're just going to lift it straight out, and we'll see how much water is inside of here. I'm sorry for all the wind noise. I've got a couple of fans going because it is hot in here, but I don't know if you guys can hear this, but yep, definitely has water in it. Oops, sorry about that. And we can see there's already corrosion building up on the throttle body. But we'll get all that cleaned up. So just rotate these. Not as much as I thought it would be, but still a pretty good amount. Yeah, so we're gonna end up cleaning up all this stuff and take the throttle body off, rinse everything out in here, blow it out with compressed air and get it to dry. The bad thing is this one still has the flame arrestor in it. So yeah, there we go. Now we can see it. This one still has the flame arrestor in it, so it's gonna be a little difficult to get all the moisture out, but we'll take care of it. So sorry for the poor camera angles today. This is kind of difficult to see, but I'm just going to take a shop vac and run a hose down in here and try to suck out any of the water that I can in here. I'm not going to turn it over. Now, I've already disconnected the fuel rail. As soon as I fire this up, it's going to start, priming fuel out of here. Definitely don't want to get fuel everywhere. Probably should have done that a little bit ago before I started dismantling everything, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to suck the water out of it and spray fogging oil in here. And what I'm going to do is use the supercharger. Since the plugs are out of it, it'll turn over really easy. So I'm going to use the supercharger to turn the engine and get that fogging oil to kind of go up and down the cylinders a little bit, just to coat the cylinders and make sure we don't get any flash rust on them. All right, so I ran the tube down here, vacuumed them out, went into the intake valves as well. There wasn't a whole lot of water in here. That's because the owner, I did tell him to pull the plugs and fire it, drown load it and get as much water to blow out as he could. So yeah, so there wasn't a whole lot in there, but I'm just going to take the storage oil now and just spray a decent amount in there. Also going to put a little bit on the intake valves. Alright, now once that's done, we're going to take a 17mm socket. We've just got a 3/8 ratchet here with a short extension on it. And we're going to rotate the supercharger, and let's see, clockwise. Nope. Let's go counterclockwise. Rotate it that way. want to go clockwise, because the supercharger turning clockwise, the gear going this way, will turn our flywheel counterclockwise, and our engine is running counterclockwise. So we're going to turn it, just rotate it over a few times. Don't worry, you're not going to loosen the nut doing this. It's not nearly enough torque to loosen anything on this. And we're just going to keep running it up and down like that. You can already kind of feel it getting a little looser with it having all that storage oil in there. So it likely got a little bit of flash rust sitting on it, but now with that storage oil in there, it's starting to move a little easier, so that's a good sign. Okay, so that should be good. We'll leave that be, and I'm going to go ahead and take the valve cover off just to look underneath here and see if we did get any kind of moisture in the oil. Like I said, on the dipstick I didn't see anything, but I just want to see if there's any moisture in the top on the valve cover. We're going to use an E8 Torx to just take off these 8 screws right here, and we'll pull it off and see what happens. Let's see what we got here. I do not see any milky oil whatsoever, but this oil is definitely going to get changed, so it's going to be pretty easy to do while this valve cover's off. I'm just going to put a tube down into the motor through here and just drain it out. And yeah, it definitely needs to be done. Just tell it it's old. It's got over 50 hours on it by now. And you know, he's running a tune on it now, so we definitely need to be changing the intervals a little quicker. But yeah, it doesn't look like any water got in the oil. I am going to pull the oil filter just to check it as well, see if there's any milky residue in there. This one looks like we're going to be able to get away without having to do a boil out procedure, which is really good. So that's going to save the customer some money. But if there was any little bit of water that happens to get ingested inside of the oil, slips past the piston rings or anything like that, it's gonna melt off and burn out. Just that little bit is gonna boil out in the oil, and there's no point in doing a boil out procedure. There's no corrosion or rust or anything in here that's setting in, because this did happen on Saturday. So it doesn't look like we're gonna have any issues with it. Okay, let's see how much water is inside of the supercharger. Ooh. Not good. So I'm going to take a glove and zip tie it around here, and just to keep any of this stuff from getting wet, because like I said, there's no water intrusion in the motor. You can see that the oil is, it's old, but it's not milky at all. There's no water intrusion inside of the motor, which is good news. That means it's going to save us a lot of extra work that we don't want to have to do. It is going to get an oil change because it needs it, but not going to have to do the 3-hour boil out procedure. So I'm really happy about that. So I'm just going to put a rubber glove around this to and zip tie it to keep any water from getting on these components here. And then I'll just rinse everything out with like some salt away and fresh water and let it dry, and we'll be good to go. All right, everything is put back together, and I went ahead and put the old spark plugs in it because I did have the fogging oil in it. So I'm going to add engine oil into it now, but I did just kind of crank it over a couple of times with without the plugs in it, just to make sure I did get all the moisture out. There was no moisture whatsoever. Put the spark plugs back in it so it would have compression and drown mode the engine, and there's no noises or anything. When I pulled the oil filter out, there was no metal in it. So this engine is pretty safe considering what happened. It seems like everything is okay. There was no metal in the oil filter. There was no water in the oil or anything. So this customer got really lucky. So I'm about to add the oil and we're gonna give it a start up. So before I start the engine up, I want to show you guys a little contraption I've got. I've got a splitter here, and one of them is going to feed the flush port on here, and I've got the other hose that goes over here. I'm actually going to stick that up through the drive shaft hole to spray water at the carbon seal. That way it'll simulate like you're actually in the water, so I don't have to sit here and just run it for a minute and then turn it off because I don't have any water going to the carbon seal. I'm going to be providing fresh cold water to carbon seal. So yeah, here we go. For a few minutes, get the oil up, the temperature, check the oil, and then top it off if it needs. Alright guys, so that's it. Everything's done on it, and like I said, man, this customer got really lucky. So make sure that you guys are periodically checking your hoses, anything that has to do with water coming in, even your coolant hoses. You know, any hose in here that has a hose clamp on it, you can tighten it down. Check them every once in a while, they can loosen up. I know the 21-year models were pretty bad about having hose clamps that weren't tight, but typically it was over on like the coolant side, not really so much of, you know, the exhaust or intercooler hoses. So yeah, like I said, this guy got really lucky, and there wasn't a whole lot of water in the intake manifold. There was some water in the cylinders when he started it, you know, when he took the plugs out and pushed the water out of them last night like I told him to. And yeah, we were able to salvage it and not have to do a boil out or anything, which is great. I mean, the oil had no contamination in it whatsoever, which means that he did not ingest a whole lot of water into the cylinders, and that the engine shut down pretty quickly, and that's really good. So I'm very happy with that. It was kind of a lengthy process to take everything apart, clean it all out, dry it out, put it back in, but you know, he's got fresh oil in it. Fresh set of plugs that I did after I did run it on the hose a little bit ago, because that fogging oil or storage oil can foul out the plugs. So they still looked okay when I took them out, but I'm going to throw those in a bag for him to have just as a spare set. But I went ahead and put a fresh set in here along with fresh oil and oil filter. And yeah, so he's good to go, and hopefully this is going to be, you know, happy customer and continue to return. And that's all I got for today. Got a couple more videos coming soon, guys. We'll see you soon. Take it easy.